At the will reading, he got the mansion. They said I'd make my way alone. I proved them wrong. The mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates felt suffocatingly formal that October afternoon in Greenwich, Connecticut. Outside, the autumn leaves painted the prestigious neighborhood in shades of gold and crimson. But inside, the atmosphere was as cold as the marble floors beneath our feet. The scent of expensive leather from the antique chairs mixed with the subtle fragrance of my stepmother's French perfume, creating an oddly oppressive combination that seemed to mirror the tension hanging in the air. I sat in the corner chair, deliberately choosing the spot furthest from the imposing oak table where the family had gathered like vultures circling their prey. My half-brother Marcus occupied the chair directly across from the attorney, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. At 28, he possessed that effortless charm that came with a lifetime of privilege, perfectly styled blonde hair, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, and blue eyes that held the kind of certainty that only old money could provide. To his right sat our stepmother, Victoria, a woman who had perfected the art of appearing grieving while simultaneously calculating. Her platinum hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, and her black Chanel suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that had likely never seen a genuine tear, maintaining the facade of the devoted widow, even as her gaze occasionally flickered toward the attorney's briefcase with unmistakable anticipation. The attorney, Mr. Sterling himself, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat with the gravity befitting a man who had spent 4 decades delivering life-changing news to Connecticut's elite. His silver hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and his weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he arranged the documents that would determine our fates. My father's will was a substantial document, bound in navy leather with gilt edges that caught the light. Harold Blackstone had been many things: a brilliant businessman, a demanding patriarch, and ultimately, a man whose love had always felt conditional. Even in death, it seemed, his approval would come with strings attached. The reading began with the smaller bequests, charitable donations that would ensure the Blackstone name remained etched on hospital wings and university buildings long after we were all gone. Victoria received a generous monthly allowance and the right to remain in the family's penthouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, securing her position in the social circles she had worked so diligently to join. The household staff received their pensions, and various cousins and distant relatives found themselves the beneficiaries of stock portfolios and trust funds. But the real estate empire, the one my father had built from a single construction company into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, was another matter entirely. The Blackstone mansion in the Hamptons, with its sprawling 40-acre estate overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, went to Marcus. The vineyard in Napa Valley, the ski lodge in Aspen, the townhouse in Boston, all of it flowed to my half-brother, like water finding its natural course. The primary inheritance, Blackstone Development Corporation, with its vast holdings of commercial properties, luxury residential complexes, and prime real estate across 3 states, would be Marcus's to command. He would sit in the corner office of the 50-story tower that bore our family name, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and shaped entire city blocks. As for me, the biological son who had spent his childhood in boarding schools and his teenage years trying to earn a father's attention that always seemed just out of reach, the will contained a different kind of message. A trust fund, modest by family standards, but substantial by any reasonable measure, would provide for my education and basic needs until the age of 30. After that, I would be expected to make my own way in the world, free from the golden chains that bound the rest of the family to my father's legacy. The silence that followed Mr. Sterling's final words was deafening. Marcus leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man whose deepest expectations had been confirmed. Victoria's relief was palpable, her position was secure, her lifestyle preserved. But there was something else in their expressions, something that made my chest tighten with a mixture of hurt and growing determination. Pity. They looked at me with pity. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that the wealthy often mistake for kindness. He expressed his regret that our father hadn't seen fit to include me more substantially in the family business, suggesting that perhaps it was for the best that I would be free to pursue my own interests without the burden of family expectations. Victoria nodded along, adding her own observations about the liberating nature of my situation. She spoke of young men who had built great fortunes from nothing, implying that this would be my chance to prove myself worthy of the Blackstone name through my own achievements rather than inheritance. But beneath their carefully chosen words, I could hear the real message. I was the consolation prize son, the one who had never quite measured up to the golden boy who would carry on the family legacy. They expected me to gracefully accept my diminished role, perhaps to appear at family gatherings as the charming younger brother who had found success in some appropriately modest profession. As we filed out of the conference room, the October sun was setting over Greenwich, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of the surrounding estates. Marcus walked with Victoria toward the black Mercedes that would take them back to the mansion, their mansion now discussing dinner plans and upcoming social obligations with the casual ease of people whose biggest worry was which charity gala to attend next weekend. I stood alone on the sidewalk, watching their taillights disappear around the corner, and felt something crystallize within me. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate, but it was being rapidly replaced by something far more powerful: determination. They had looked at me with pity, spoken to me as if my diminished inheritance was somehow a kindness, a gentle way of setting me free from expectations I could never meet. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The walk back to my rented apartment in Stamford gave me time to think, to process not just what had happened, but what it meant for my future. The trust fund would cover my living expenses and provide startup capital for whatever venture I chose to pursue. But it was the freedom from family obligation that felt most valuable now. For the first time in my life, I would be able to build something that was entirely my own, something that bore no trace of my father's influence or approval. That night, I sat in my modest one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by the law textbooks and business journals that had filled my graduate school years, and began to formulate a plan. The real estate industry was in my blood, whether my father had acknowledged it or not. I had spent my summers working construction crews, learning the business from the ground up while Marcus sailed in the Hamptons. I had studied market trends and development strategies with the passion of someone who genuinely loved the work, not just the profits it generated. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father's decision to essentially cut me loose from the family business might have been the greatest gift he could have given me. Marcus would inherit a company built on Harold Blackstone's vision, constrained by decades of established practices and weighed down by the expectations of being the heir to a legacy. But I would have something infinitely more valuable: the hunger that comes from having everything to prove and nothing to lose. 5 years later, the Connecticut real estate landscape looked dramatically different, and my name was no longer whispered in the same sentence as the son who got nothing. The initial months after the will reading had been a masterclass in humility and determination. I had started with a single property, a rundown apartment building in Hartford that nobody else wanted to touch. The previous owner was eager to sell, tired of dealing with the constant maintenance issues and the challenge of finding reliable tenants in a neighborhood that most developers had written off. But where others saw problems, I saw potential. The building's bones were solid, and the location was positioned perfectly for the urban renewal that I could see coming to Hartford's downtown district. I spent my days with contractors, learning every aspect of renovation and restoration, and my evenings studying market trends and demographic shifts that suggested this particular area was poised for growth. The transformation took 8 months of 18-hour days, bleeding knuckles from hands-on construction work, and every penny of my initial investment. But when it was complete, the building that had been an eyesore became a model of affordable luxury updated. Apartments with modern amenities at prices that attracted young professionals who were being priced out of the more established neighborhoods. Success of that first project opened doors I hadn't expected. Word traveled quickly in Connecticut's tight-knit business community about the young developer who had turned a profit where others had failed. More importantly, I had proven to myself that my instincts about real estate development were sound, that my years of studying the industry hadn't been wasted. The second project was more ambitious, a small office complex in New Haven that had been abandoned during the economic downturn. This time, I was able to attract investors, other entrepreneurs who were impressed by my track record and hungry for the returns that creative real estate development could provide. We transformed the space into flexible office suites perfect for startups and small businesses, complete with shared conference rooms and modern technology infrastructure docked by the third year. Meridian Development, the company I had named after the concept of reaching one's highest point, was managing a portfolio of properties across Connecticut and expanding into Massachusetts. We specialized in what I called opportunity development, taking properties that others had overlooked or abandoned and finding innovative ways to make them profitable while improving their communities. The approach was different from Blackstone Development's model, which focused primarily on luxury properties for wealthy clients. Meridian targeted the growing market of young professionals, small business owners, and entrepreneurs who wanted quality spaces at reasonable prices. We weren't trying to build the most expensive properties in the market. We were trying to build the most valuable ones. The media began to take notice. Local business journals wrote features about the unconventional developer who was revitalizing forgotten corners of Connecticut cities. The Hartford Courant ran a profile titled "The Developer Who Sees Gold in Urban Rust," highlighting our success in transforming neglected properties into thriving community assets. But it was the article in the Wall Street Journal that changed everything. The piece, titled "Second Generation Success: Building Beyond the Family Business," examined several entrepreneurs who had created their own empires rather than inheriting established companies. My story was featured prominently, not as the son who had been passed over, but as the visionary who had chosen his own path and found remarkable success. The article caught the attention of national investors and development firms who were looking for partners in secondary markets. Suddenly, I had access to capital that allowed Meridian to pursue much larger projects. We began acquiring entire city blocks, developing mixed-use complexes that combined residential, commercial, and retail space in ways that created vibrant communities rather than just profitable buildings. The flagship project that truly established Meridian as a major player was the redevelopment of a former manufacturing district in Bridgeport. What had once been a collection of abandoned factories and empty warehouses became Innovation Square, campus that housed everything from tech startups to artisan food markets, from luxury lofts to affordable family housing. The project took 2 years to complete and required a level of coordination between municipal government, community organizations, and private investors that had never been attempted in the region. When Innovation Square opened, it didn't just house businesses and residents, it transformed an entire neighborhood. Property values in the surrounding area increased by 40% within 6 months. Crime rates dropped as foot traffic and community engagement increased. Local restaurants and shops that had been struggling for years suddenly found themselves busy again as the development brought new life to the area. The success caught the attention of mayors and city planners from across New England, all eager to discuss how Meridian's model might work in their communities. I found myself speaking at conferences and consulting with municipal governments about sustainable urban development. The young man who had been pitied for his modest inheritance was now being sought out as an expert in his field. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during a chance encounter at a charity gala in Manhattan. I was there representing Meridian, which had become a significant donor to several educational and community development nonprofits. As I moved through the crowd of New York's social elite, I spotted Marcus across the room, deep in conversation with a group of older men whose expensive suits and confident postures marked them as established players in the city's business community. When our eyes met, there was a moment of recognition that felt like a scene from a movie. Marcus excused himself from his conversation and approached with the kind of measured steps that suggested he was still processing the transformation he was witnessing. Gone was the pity from that afternoon in the attorney's office. In its place was something that looked remarkably like respect, tinged with just a hint of surprise. We spoke briefly, exchanging the kind of polite pleasantries that successful businessmen share at social events. He mentioned that he had been following Meridian's progress in the business press, complimenting our innovative approach to urban development. I thanked him for his kind words and mentioned that Blackstone Development's work continued to set the standard for luxury real estate in the region. But beneath the cordial surface of our conversation, we both understood what was really being acknowledged. I had built something substantial, something that stood on its own merit rather than family legacy. The trust fund that had seemed like such a modest consolation prize had become the foundation for an empire that was rapidly approaching the scale and influence of the company I had been excluded from inheriting. As the evening progressed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The anger and hurt from that October afternoon 5 years earlier had long since transformed into gratitude. My father's decision to force me to make my own way hadn't been the rejection I had originally perceived. It had been the gift of necessity, the push that had driven me to discover capabilities I never would have developed within the comfortable confines of inherited success. The final irony became clear in the months that followed the gala. Meridian Development was approached by several major firms interested in partnership opportunities, including some that had historically worked exclusively with Blackstone Development. The company that had been built from the ashes of disappointment was now being courted as an equal partner by the same establishment that had once dismissed its founder as the son who hadn't quite measured up. That the mansion in the Hamptons was still beautiful. The Blackstone name still commanded respect in certain circles, and Marcus continued to run the family business with competence and dignity. But the empire I had built belonged to me completely, bore my vision entirely, and stood as proof that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you're given, it's what you're forced to create for yourself. Standing in my corner office in downtown Hartford, looking out over the city that had become the proving ground for my ambitions, I realized that the story wasn't really about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that worth isn't inherited, it's earned, built, and defined by the courage to transform rejection into determination and disappointment into opportunity. The boy who had been told he would make his own way had done exactly that, and in the process, had discovered that his own way was exactly where he belonged.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.